Hello. Hello. I'm Steffi. I'm your friend from DLD. Thanks for joining us for this amazing session today. We have two extraordinary guys here at DLD Think, at our, I think, 10th DLD. They will talk about the future of cities, the future of work, the future of offices, the future of our environments, and I'm so happy that both will see each other for the first time. And as you can imagine, DLD is always about making connections. This is for a virtual connection, but soon we will have a real connection. So our first speaker is Carlo Ratti. Carlo is an old-time friend of DLD. I think, Carlo, you spoke at DLD first time 2009. 11 years of DLD friendship. This is amazing. And you are our visionary in terms of the future of cities. You are visionaries in the terms of climate change. You're an activist. You're an educator. You're an amazing inspirator, a visionary. And thank you for being with us. You have founded the City Lab, it's Sensible City Lab of MIT. You're a professor at MIT. I can go on and on and on. Great that you are here. You give us a presentation, and then our new friend from Steelcase. Who of you have heard about Steelcase? It's a great company in terms of design, offices, future of workplace. You will get to meet soon James. Where are you, James? I can't see you, but James is a new friend, and I'm looking forward to the discussion you both will have. Carlo,
thank you.
What is the future of? What is the next in terms of your research?
Thank you, Steffi. Thank you, Steffi, and you're the best matchmaker. By the way, you're right. We met back in 2008. The first time is in New York. At MoMA, where we had an exhibition, a part of Paolo Antonelli's exhibition, and that's it's been a great pleasure to participate to several DLDs since then. So anyway, what I will do is I'll be very short. Just want to put something on the table, so then we can have a discussion. Both us speaking here, but also with all of you who are listening. And the point, the question is. I phrase it something that's on everybody's mind, how office design is changing, and do we still need offices today? Now, a few years ago, I wrote an op-ed, this was 4 years ago, an op-ed for the Harvard Business Review. And the title they gave to my op-ed was, "If work is digital, why do we still go to the office?" And the point I was making actually was that we still need to go to the office, even if work is digital, because in the office, magic happens. That doesn't happen just online. Now, that was a few years ago, but at the same time, over the past few months, it's like the world has changed a lot. And now we're reading headlines such as this one. Twitter was actually the first company to announce, the first major company to announce that the employees will be allowed to work from home forever. We don't need offices anymore. Now, if everybody's going to do this, or even if companies are going to downsize like, 20, 30%, this could be a huge change. Think about how many millions of or billions of square feet we're going to free in cities around the world, and how we need to basically restructure our stock because of this. So is this going to happen? And are we all going to work like Twitter employees a few years from now? Well, let me tell you what I think. And I wanted to start by looking at data. Again, one of the things that I believe the pandemic has taught us is that we need to rely more on data. And data can really guide us a lot in our decision making. And I wanted to start with data we started collecting on the MIT campus from a few years ago. Actually, this is over 10 years ago. Here you see Boston, you see the MIT campus, Harvard there, don't bother, to the left, upper left. What we started collecting is actually Wi-Fi data. Wi-Fi data that tells us in an anonymized way where people are on campus. And by the way, this type of data, we were among the first ones to collect. Now, there's people operating shopping malls are doing the same and so on. But this is like what real estate loves, because it tells you how well you use every square meter or every square foot that you build. And in the meanwhile, over the past 20 years, this has happened. So, we've been capturing part of this transformation, that we used to work, like you see there to the left at MIT. And now, people work, as you see there, to the right. Now, I would concede that these two images are a bit extreme. To the left, I put the most depressing computer room I could find. To the right, there's a beautiful sunny day. I need to tell you that last winter, when it was minus 18 Celsius, it wasn't the same, but it gives you a sense of the changes that we've seen all over the world. We used to work like this. By the way, this is an image from Jacques Tati movie Playtime, making fun of cubicles. And believe it or not, generations of workers have spent their lives into cubicles such as this one. And now we tend to work in a different environment. By the way, this is a design we did for one of the largest co-working spaces in Europe, in Milan, called Talent Garden. So, we work in a much more informal way. So again, going back to data, we started collecting data while this transformation was happening. And the type of data we've been collecting is data that tells us for every Wi-Fi, how many people are connected to it. So where are people on campus? And you see the bubbles you see here, really the bubbles of people and how they are placed on campus and how they move. You see in the morning where people are, in midday where they go, and they go to classrooms and they go to labs and they go eat and so on. Now, what you can do then is for every room on campus, you can actually get like a signature. You know how it's been used over time. You don't know who the people are, but you know how many people you have over time. Think about this as like a signature that tomorrow will tell you every square foot, how it's being used over time. You can also get aggregated, and then you can analyze the data in different ways. Standard big data analytics. I will not get to this, but what you get out of this, you can really get a better sense of how different clusters of square meters work. So how people use, what are the different family of usage of in terms of real estate. Now, that's the first thing. It tells us how people use physical space. But think about what is MIT, what is DLD, what is Steelcase, what is a great company or a great organization? Well, it's nothing else, I would argue, than a bunch of people who share physical space, who share and connect in digital space, and together try to achieve something. We try to be collectively more than the sum of each of us individually. So today we can measure all those three parameters. And that's what we're actually doing. And we think that that can be a very interesting tool, amazing tool for designers. So here you saw how we use physical space, is the data I've been showing you. We're also looking at the communities that come together in physical space. We're looking at productivity for a university is easy. So what we try to do together, papers and patents, we can measure that, and we can look at the digital network, how we come together in digital space. So somehow by measuring all these three things, we can get a very interesting view on how we work as an organization and how digital and physical space interact to allow us to achieve something. Now, we've been doing this the beginning, using physical space for a number of years. You find some papers online, that were some of the first ones to analyze usage of real estate. Now, we had started just looking at digital networks as well and how we interact in productivity a few months ago, before the pandemic hit. And so what I wanted to start sharing with you is, what the result of the pandemic has been. And I skip through these images. These are, sorry, I added two images that are projects we're doing in our design office, where we take some of this information, we try to turn it into design. But I see that we're running a couple of minutes late, so I'll skip that. I will not talk to you about our office design, our design of offices at CRA, Carlo Ratti Associati. Will focus more on the research. And so what you see here is actually data collected since the pandemic. And it's data of how people connect and how our networks are changing. And so what I want to share with you, this is still unpublished data, but we're very excited about this, is that the first hypothesis where we're finding that the data corroborate that hypothesis is right, is that if we only work digitally, if we only connect on Zoom, our weak ties disappear. So basically that in our network, you got two types of ties. Strong ties, your people we know very, very well. Usually they form triangle. There's a famous paper by Granovetter, sociologist from Stanford, 1970s, that is called the strength of weak ties. So weak ties are very, very important, but strong ties are the one that form a triangle that basically we know someone, we know another person, and both of them know each other. So usually new information doesn't come from strong ties. Strong ties are our circle where we're very, very connected, but they don't bring us new ideas and new information. Weak ties are very important. And that's a paper by Granovetter that demonstrates it. Now what we are seeing is that it seems, take it with a pinch of salt, it's still very fresh data, that we get fewer weak ties. And I think that's one reason why we want physical space. Physical space is amazing because of serendipity. We don't expect something, we bump into somebody whom we barely know, or someone whom we don't know. And we start a conversation, and from that, actually, new ideas are generated, and new perspective can be opened up. Because this is someone who is not part of our inner circle, of the people who think like us and so on. Somehow, another way to say it is that, the problem of the network we've seen over the past few years is echo chambers. We connect with a bunch of friends, we eliminate the people who think in a different way, and we all think in the same way, and we get this echo chamber, we reinforce this, and actually sometimes this spins out of control on social media. We've seen that over and over the past few years. Well, physical space is probably the strongest antidote we have today. It's a place where we are forced. There's some kind of an inevitability of physical space, of space of the office, of public space, not digital, but physical space. That inevitability forces us to mediate and negotiate also with people that we cannot just remove like we do online, cannot avoid. And it forces us to get in touch with things that we are not looking for. It basically, in short, it forces on us serendipity. So that's the first thing. I think that's why we will still need physical space for working. And again, that is related to diversity. Diversity, I think, is very important. Look at what's happening today in the United States. Some of the clashes are really part of the lack of diversity that cities were promoting, to the segregation that's been building up over the years. And again, diversity is much higher if we move into physical space, in the space of the office or in the space of the city. Again, serendipity, as I mentioned before, is what physical space is very, very good at. And here you see also the first results from the MIT campus, that the volumes, basically some of the very simple result. If you look at our groups at MIT, if you look at the volume of emails exchange before the pandemic and after the pandemic, we exchanged much more emails with our closer ties, with stronger ties with the group, and then outside the group much less, or it hasn't increased that much. So in proportion, much less than what it was before. So again, those are just two initial results to pose the following hypothesis that I would like to share with you, which is that basically, and I stopped this, sorry, so that we can start to see each other, that basically physical space will be very important in the future. We will still work in offices. Yes, maybe we'll downsize. I'm not saying that we might see major changes. Even if we downsize globally 10%, the impact on the planet, on cities could be huge, could be major. Think about New York. If 10% of office space were to be converted into something else, could be a revolution. But so we might see some of that. But at the same time, I don't believe that we will all be working like Twitter, or like also Facebook suggested that people might work distributed all over the planet. I still think there's an important value in connecting in physical space, and that value is really the value of encounters and serendipity and diversity and weak ties. Those things that have so far we've not been able to replicate in digital space. I think that this was also a good way to reassure James. And James, and his company, they design amazing things for physical space, for offices, and to furnish our offices and our buildings in general. So that is, I believe, going to stay. Change might be a big change, but still, I don't believe we will all be connecting just digitally in a few years from now. And by the way, just to finish, I also think that DLD will get back in a physical space. You might have heard that yesterday Davos announced that they're going to be is going to happen also in physical space, most likely in January, still to be confirmed. But I think they announced it again. There's a value when we meet in the same room, and that's again the magic of DLD that can be partially mimicked here. But here, we are an existing community. It's more difficult to make sure that here we create those new sparkles that actually happen naturally when we are all in the same place in Munich. And I'll stop here. That was just my initial what I want to put on the table at the beginning, and I'll leave it, Steffi and James to
Carlo, jump. Thank you so much. I loved your mentioning the power of the weak links, the weak ties, and now I have the honor to connect two strong ties. You, James Ludwig, the Vice President of Steelcase for Design and Product Engineering. And Carlo, it was so amazing what you just said, because this power of serendipity is in physical spaces is so important for all of us. It's so humane. It's connects every one of us in a different way, and we need these places to spark our creativity, our flexibility. James, you listened to what Carlo said. How as an engineer, as a product designer, what would you answer to this, what Carlo said? Please go ahead.
I listened with pleasure, because I think, now I understand why you paired us, not because of our fashion choices, but because I think of some commonality of ideas. I think, a couple of things that you brought up are things that really echo my own sentiments, that the physical space is a place for experimentation and serendipity, right? So, and that is really one of those things. You talked a little bit about organizations and people. I would just take that one step further and say that's what describes culture. And really, culture is what gets things done in organizations. And it's also the body language of the company when people aren't looking. And so that's really formed and shaped by like what you talked about, by coming together, connecting, collaborating, and sort of shaping a set of common values. And there's no substitute for physical space. I've been reading these articles as well. And I did read the article about Twitter. One of the things that we say in design and innovation, obviously, is fail fast to succeed sooner. So I'm hoping that Twitter's experiment fails fast so that they can succeed sooner, because it's going to be interesting to see how these great experiments extrapolate into, how companies create culture, shape culture, which in essence are there strong ties, right? So I often find that one question we should be asking ourselves is, how long will our strong ties endure in the face of not coming together before they themselves become weak ties? There's an erosion in this circle of trust when we can't connect, when we can't collaborate. It's not only about productivity, it's really fundamentally shaped around culture. A lot of the questions that I'm asked today are like, what are we doing now to respond to the pandemic? And I think some of those are pedestrian, conversations. Obviously, we're de-densifying high traffic areas. You modify shared space. You stagger seating and desks. You create buffer zones for safe distancing. But the interesting thing there is, one of my designers in Munich brought up a really interesting point, is what that signals to us. It's design, in a sense, finding a way to make visible this invisible threat or this challenge. And I think some of the ways that the future of office, city, even how we interact with our own environments when we're allowed to leave our homes without being quarantined, is this notion of, what will that experience be? Will it be virus-centric or will it be human-centric? And the human-centric one, I think, manifests itself in a different way. So the example that I give was, you go into two stores, and I think you can say office, you can say building, you can say, any kind of physical space. One has orange signs with large black type that says, wear a mask, safe distancing, shows you your traffic pattern. It's a very, I'd say, efficient engineered solution. But you walk into a different one, maybe a different store might choose to manifest that a different way. And you're met by a well-dressed concierge who hands you your personal shopping bag. They only allow a certain number of people in. You get your, your specific, you get your own hand sanitizer and maybe a time limit. Like, those are two radically different experiences for controlling what I'll call the current threat. But that's how design manifests itself in our own physical and sort of experiences as we move through. And those kinds of like interventions are going to be key to helping us when we start to shape what the world of work looks like in the future. So I think what Carl is talking about, and then you back it up by data, which is a great point to sort of have a basis of conversation, right? Other than a sort of a fear-based sense, but it's actually a science-based sense of how we're going to shape our cities and our workspaces in the future.
And it's not only a fear-based sense, or a data-based sense. I think it's a matter of trust. How big is the role, Carlo, for future cities? What does trust mean in the designing of cities, and James, in the designing of workplaces or environments, creative environments? I think we are not talking enough about the power of trust. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I think you're right, Steffi. I think there's two ways to look at trust. I think that's what James was saying. If I understand James correctly, that type of trust is the trust that you generate inside a company, an organization. So I think we all know that, it's very easy to do this webinar with you and with a friend at DLD, because we met in physical space, we build the trust, and then digital can perpetuate the trust. It's much more difficult to build the trust from the get-go without having never met in person. Somehow, still, the bandwidth we have, think about the bandwidth, think about what we could do maybe 5 or 10 years ago with video conference. The bandwidth was much less. Now with systems such as this one, Zoom, whatever you want, maybe also 3D system, we got more bandwidth, but still the bandwidth we got in physical space is so much bigger. And that is what builds, and spending time together in physical space builds more trust. It's another important point. And so that's one way to look at trust and how physical space builds trust. I think, Steffi, you were hinting at another way to look at trust in the city, or trust in tomorrow's cities. What is going to be our relationship? Are we going to be scared about the city, not trusting the city because of this invisible threat? Now, here I would like to reassure everybody. I'll tell you my perspective, but I believe that cities start around 10,000 years ago, and over the past 10,000 years, cities have been hit by many epidemics and pandemics. And some of them have been much worse than this one. Think about Venice in the 14th century. It loses 60% of its population, 60% of the population, because of the Black Death, because of the plague. And still, despite that, over the centuries, and there's many others. There's another famous, epidemic in Venice, which actually inspires Thomas Mann, the great writer, to write Death in Venice. There's a beautiful movie then directed by Luchino Visconti about that. So despite all of this, we still love the Lido Street of Venice. We still, crowd its theaters. We still are close to each other. And the reason is that, the pandemics have hit the city so many times over the years, but still the bond that brings us together in cities, the only reason to have cities is really to bring us together. That the beauty of being together and enjoying the power of togetherness, then, that has always survived. And I think it will survive this time as well. If you look at this by historic standard, and again, I'm terrified about the numbers and the number of deaths that we are reading in the papers, but when you look at that by historic standards, it's probably for cities, with the eyes of the city, the 10,000-year-old eyes of our cities, this is probably not the worst catastrophe or pandemic that they have ever seen. So from that point of view, I think we will certainly go back to living the city before and trusting the city, if that was the meaning of trust you meant. And I also think, that when we talk about design, I want to add one final point, is I like what Jane was saying, and certainly there's a lot of design to be done for the transition phase. For a few months, even a few years, we don't know, we'll need to coexist with the virus, to live with the virus, and then we need to change some things. and so change the design of our planes, of our offices, of the way we interact with space. So I think that's certainly important. But to me, the most interesting thing here is let's then jump to the post-pandemic world. Maybe some people say the vaccine is ready at the end of the year, so maybe this is January 2021, maybe it's 2022, we don't know. But let's move there. And then let's look at what are the changes going to be. And I think, again, then the question is, what is the potential for design there? I think even if we go back to offices, I think we'll go back in a different way. And let me just maybe say this. So if, imagine that, as we were saying, we still go back to offices, so we're not all going to do like Twitter, but we're more flexible with our lives. And so on average, people, spend 1 or 2 days every week less in the office. They can spend a longer weekend in Munich and work from Munich on Monday or Tuesday, and then go back to their main place. So they can be more flexible. They can go to the countryside, to the seaside, and lead a slightly more flexible life. So they still go to the office, but a bit less. But the consequence of that as well mean very new, interesting challenges for designers. For instance, you want to do everything probably like hot desking. In that case, you cannot have a lot of empty real estate that's depressing and empty half of the week just because somebody comes a couple of days per week. So you want to share the desk more. If you share the desk more, also you want to be sure that they're clean, even in the post-pandemic world. So I think we actually just filed a patent about a system that allows you to self-clean your desk, because then it becomes interesting. If you need to share it, especially more with hot desking, that becomes another important thing. The other thing you want to do is that if you want to build trust in the community and create serendipity, but you're spending half of the time in the office or whatever, 60 or 70%, more or less, I don't know where that will end, but certainly I believe less than what is today, then how can we design places where the very nature of work is a bit different? And I would call that something like, something that could be event-based working. So you go to the office, but you go there with activities. It can be because you have a lunch speech. It's a traditional way, that universities have been doing this, like Cambridge University over the past 1,000 years, Cambridge and Oxbridge, try to find ways to bring people together exactly for that in the limited time they had. Well, until the 19th century, they used the church. Now, I don't think we'll use the church in the church, so people would go every day to pray together. It was a way for the community to reinforce. And then they use food since the 19th century. And food has been really the formal dinner and so on in order to allow this kind of bond to reinforce. So can we actually think about new spaces that make sure that in the more limited time we spend together, we actually can achieve more in terms of trust, serendipity, and so on. And so those, for me, are the beautiful design questions we have for the world post-COVID, when the virus is gone.
Fascinating, Carlo. But James, what does it mean for what Carlo just said for your work? What is the future of your work?
Well, I think what's really key to Carlo's point is at some point this specific pandemic is going to be past. So we know that design and designers take the long view. So we will have a post-COVID world in some form or another. And that has to be shaped by the questions about why and what, which was, I think, what Carlo was getting at in the sense of, why is it essential for people to come together? Not just simply, it's on my calendar, so I will go to work. And I think what that will help us do is to continue to ask this idea of why is this essential? What is the essential nature of work? What is the essential nature of culture? To keep those questions at the forefront will help design move through this idea of how do we get back to work through some of these, I'll call it sort of more engineered solutions. One of the things I think that you were touching on as well, Carlo, is that's I think really we're talking about. We could call this digital transformation and the disruption. That this is creating an acceleration of the decentralization and diversification of work through this digital transformation. This is a great experiment in how to work, learn, and teach virtually. And we're learning as we're going, and we're creating a large collective body of knowledge. To extrapolate durable insights through that after 2.5 months or however long it's been, depending on your geography, I think it's fine to say we're seeing latent or weak signals coming out of that. To create real durable insights out of that, I think it's going to take much more time because of the erosion of strong ties, the erosion of culture, the ability to make teams feel like teams, the ability to collaborate and be creative and connect. Those are the things that are that's data that we have not yet collected. We've all been in a fresh new relationship where everything seems perfect. So I think that's, in a way, we can describe this infatuation with this sort of new phase. If you love working from home, let's talk in 6 months, let's talk in 9 months, let's talk in 2 years. I've incorporated work from home into my work experience ever since I finished university. That's sort of the privilege of the creative discipline, right? And I also think there's a place for certain kinds of activities. Deep work, do I need to do that from home or do I need to do that from work? Single individual contributors are going to have a different experience than people who are highly networked and highly dependent on the work of others. All those things are going to come together in sort of this big knot of knowledge and insight that we're going to get. And as we tease that apart, I think what we're going to see is, despite the fact that we're all facing one single global pandemic, I'm not certain, and again, fresh thinking, that there's going to be one single global answer to this because of culture, because of our comfort with risk, because of the way societies and cultures are formed differently, because of policy, because of government. I mean, every region might experience a different way that we return to work. I mean, again, my home is in the middle of Michigan, and I have the luxury of space like many people in the suburbs. But if you're in Hong Kong and you're a 4-person family and your 2 children are trying to finish high school while the 2 parents are trying to work, you have a different relationship to your office. And I think those things all have to play a part in sort of how we shape the future.
James, I have a very pragmatic idea. What connects us all? What is the simplest solution which connects us? It's a good chair. It's a good chair.
Yeah, I won't disagree with that, even though I'm standing right now.
You cannot talk about the future of work without sitting on a fantastic chair. And I think sometimes the simplest solutions of making comfortable places to have the possibility to think creative is sometimes I sit on very uncomfortable chairs and I hate it. And
but Steffi, I would challenge it a little bit, because the chair is great, but what about working from a chaise longue next to the beach?
Exactly. Yes.
And there's something we should not underestimate. And the thing is that like James, I also have had the luxury of being very flexible in the way of working all my life, because of doing design and doing research, and so you can be a little bit whatever you want. At the same time, there was kind of a social norm. And for instance, if you had to meet a client, they thought that if you say, can we do a video conference, that you would not take them seriously. I mean, all of us, unfortunately, over the past few years have had the experience, many of my colleagues, myself, of flying around the world, flying, say, New York to Hong Kong or to Singapore for a 3-hour meeting and flying back. And that is crazy. It's nuts for the environment. But I think, there was no escape. Now, I think something very profound that this thing has changed is that I think those things are not going to happen anymore. I think my impression is that, I think people now are comfortable. Yes, maybe next time you're in Hong Kong in 3 months, you will stop by, but, you don't need to be in the same place at the same time for this. You can do a call, video conference call. And the same applies to the office. Yes, you can work from home, but, there was this feeling again, it was a social norm of having to be in the office. So I think that has changed, and it's probably the biggest thing that it's probably a good thing, first of all, for the planet, for mobility in general. It makes our lives more flexible. And I think, again, we still need to go to the office, but we need to find a better reason than just going to the office. A reason that office, maybe, Steffi, as you're saying, has to compete with your chaise longue in front of Portofino. And then, then that office has to offer more in different ways in order to make sure that you pick one versus the other. And when you pick that one, you also need to add the negative cost of commuting, so that, that's most people commented, well, I got so much time in my hands because I save whatever 1, 2, or 3 hours per day. Some people. So I think that's a revolution in the way of working. So what I want to say is that this kind of change in social norm might be a very disruptive force looking forward, which means we need to make our offices even more attractive and decide when to go there, probably a bit less, and make sure that when we go there, it's such an amazing place that can compete with the best beach or the best mountain or the other best place where we could be, and they can bring together that richness, squeeze out those juices from us that otherwise, from us together, from the community, that otherwise wouldn't run.
James.
Well, it is the #1 call we're getting right now is chair, because people are, I think the absence of that, right, is really, you feel that that's the first thing you feel. So that's absolutely relevant. I think the other thing about, the competition for your time, where you will choose to spend your time, is nothing new. But this digital transformation is sort of democratizing that and making it more than a perk for the 20% of people, sort of globally, who enjoyed the ability to work from home. Right now, people are saying, is that a perk, or is that, is it being imposed on me? Irrespective of where you are working, the best place or the right place is really key, right? And that is sort of, what are you doing, where are you doing it, and who are you doing it with? And I think that's where we both agree that the office will remain a hub for, innovation. One thing about cities I find interesting right now, and I think it's applicable, is there's a resort town near here. It's not Portofino. And they were trying to figure out how to open up for a holiday weekend, the restaurants. And they took one of the main streets and they decided to close it off to traffic, so the restaurants could put all of their tables out into the street to allow some of the people to come, able to open up restaurants and stuff. And it made me start to think, why aren't we seeing more cities use this as an opportunity for transformation, to create a more humane city that's not built for efficiency, traffic, and commerce, but actually for the people within the city, to create an even richer environment? Because again, the conflicting emotions around being in the city right now is clearly evident in people's response to when the pandemic hit New York, right? So now the next question would be, to Carlo's point, how long is my commute? Do I want to take public transportation? Can I take an elevator up to the 37th floor where my office has been? All those questions are going to have to be answered and rethought, irrespective of whether we create a healthy, safe, sort of physically, cognitively, creatively, emotionally sound workspace. All this, the systemic problem is going to have to be rethought. And I think that's an incredible opportunity for design right now, architects, urban planners, and designers as well.
James, is there a design for engagement? I think we all agree upon the question that we have to engage in the well-being of our societies, of our global Earth, of our climate, but not everyone who is watching right now dares to engage. So Carlo and James, is there a design which can make it easier for us to engage in the well-being of our societies? Well, we are all obsessed with technology. Does technology help us to engage for society?
I think what's really key is that human well-being, it's not an additive layer, but an essential one. And if you go back to this idea of why, which I talked about, many of the hows that we're exploring and we're seeing published in papers or experimenting with right now, are really about solving the current problem. But the idea of this opening up possibilities to talk more about human well-being, whether at an urban scale or an office scale, I think is really key. And I think it's going to shine a new light. Carlo, you touched on this. It's shining a new light on this idea of designing for equity and really understanding that not everything is equitable. Not all of our solutions came from an equitable position, and not all of the results of that were such. I think many of these companies that are starting to ask the questions, does everyone need to be in the Bay Area? Does everyone need to be in Manhattan? How do we create an environment where we can have the best talent from anywhere around the world work? And this digital transformation is going to help with that. But, again, I think it's really worth asking that many of these big technology companies that made this possible for us to connect like this. As you know, it's surprising it's as good as it is. But many of them were doubling down on building palaces of work in the most expensive real estate markets in the world, you know, through a belief that bringing us together as people is really the way to unlock our deepest creative and innovative potential.
Yeah, and I want to say, I wanted to add to bringing us together. I saw one of the questions here. It's on the private chat. I don't know if everybody's seen it, but it's about what is the role of art. Certainly, art has a big role to play in the office, especially in this kind of thing where imagine displays that bring us together, that can create emotions. You know, that's what art is about, and then, you know, can start a conversation. Art is about, you know, is about looking at the world from a different perspective, maybe more creative and having very, very deep feelings about what we're seeing. So I think, you know, art could be something very important. I see it because I want to use this answer that just saw as a question here in the private chat. Regarding cities and what you're saying, I think cities will have to compete really like offices to justify more than they had to justify before. You know, the fact of, yes, you know, being in a place where everything is 3 times more expensive, and you know the air is not as clean, and all of that, you know, for what reason? And so I think certainly the cultural offering, the restaurants, all of that has disappeared at the moment. So hopefully that, well, that for sure will come back. But somehow I think, you know, cities, it's not unlikely that we'll see something we've seen in the past. You know, if you look at the 20th century, how cities have been doing in the 20th century, there have been decades where really people didn't want to live in Manhattan, and, you know, the place to be was really in the suburbs out there. Now, I don't think this is exactly what will happen, and also that will not be particularly good for sustainability. If you all, you know, we know the suburbs are very inefficient in terms of energy consumption, but I think some rebalancing might happen. So that actually, which might be good news. You know, I think cities have become not affordable for many, you know, for many young professionals, for the less wealthy. So I think this might make our cities again finally more affordable.
So what is the future of it? Do you think we all live in the country and the young people stay in the cities and are creative? Or as you probably heard about Rem Koolhaas' exhibition in the Guggenheim, the celebration of the countryside. What is the future of our cities? You all know the term smart cities. Is it necessary that we have smart cities, or should we have emotional cities? Should we have energized cities? What is your personal approach to the future of your personal approach to the future of a city?
Just a quick response from me would be, you know, I agree with smart cities. I'm not a technologist. I do feel like I'm more of a humanist. So I would everything should be in the service of creating a more humane and equitable city. And I think that should go along with kind of all of this discussion, even with respect to work, you know, to create, you know, what do we know when people use the code word, I'd like to create a more humane office? It generally has to do with, do I see myself? Do I have identity? Do I have agency? Does it, you know, does it support me? Am I able to bring my whole self there? Am I safe? All of those things will come together. And I think cities are no different. I think you know, it's no doubt, no secret to any of us that that is top of mind around the world right now. And, you know, again, I think there's really a role for cities. Obviously, I agree with Carlo. You know, I love the dynamic and vibrant, you know, sort of contact buzz I get when I'm there. You know, I would spend way more time in the city if I could right now. But I think it is time for transformation. I think the digital transformation is creating more opportunities for people to have a greater share and a greater voice in that. And so that's what I'd like to see.
Carlo, how can we trigger diversity in cities?
Yeah, well, first of all, let me say I hate the word smart city. I think, you know, smart city sounds too much like a city run by technology. That's why our lab, by the way, at MIT is called Sensible City, like sense-able, a city that's able to sense, but also sensible. Look, I think, you know, I think cities, ultimately, Shakespeare says, what is the city but the people? And so, you know, the city is really about bringing us together. So I think what is going to happen, we need to find new ways again. We're going to reconfigure a bit how we get together. We mentioned about the office, and some of this is going to happen in the city as well. And, you know, and as designers, the question we have, which is an amazing question to be thinking about, is, you know, how can we transform and rethink the physical space in order to adjust to this new reality? But ultimately, it's always about, you know, bringing us together in the office, in the city, and in general. You know, that's probably what life is about.
Interesting. So there's this coin of the World Economic Forum to make the world a better place. What is your solution to work to make the world a better place?
Go ahead, Carlo.
Sure. Well, you know, I think is design, and I think in design, I think if we were to start a conversation about what is design, we would get many different answers. I think usually when I do this at Milan Design Week or at MIT, you know, some of the people say, well, design is about solving problems. I don't think so. If you think about the most amazing piece of design in the 20th century is probably the internet. You know, if people 10,000 years from now were to think about the 20th century, they that's the thing that would probably remain. And you know, and that was not trying to solve a problem, was following a dream. So I think, you know, design is our way to transform the present into possible futures. Herbert Simon, who won the Nobel Prize in economics in the 20th century, you know, he said the natural sciences look at how the world is. Design looks at how the world ought to be, how it could be. So basically, design is our way to project into the future, to try many things, for sure to fail. We heard it before, you know, some of these experiments will fail, and, you know, they will fail hopefully fast so we can jump on the things that actually work. So basically using design to imagine and to think about the world of tomorrow, hopefully, as you're saying, a better world.
And so Nader Tahani, the dean of the Cooper Union, my alma mater, said something like, sometimes it takes a crisis to show us we're already living in a different world. And I think that's one of the things that we're realizing is we're awakening to the fact that the world may not be what we thought it was, and that it's time to really to have frank and courageous and creative dialogue around what that really means. I think the definition of the city, the definition of work, the very definition of what it means to be human, as we talk about sort of how technologies infuse our lives. And I agree that with Carlo is that, you know, it is about exploring possibilities and making mistakes and learning from that, and then iterating. And I think that is something that this community is actually quite good at. So it is important to get this voice at a seat at the table at every level, because again, the opportunity that's in front of us can either be, you know, go one direction or the other. And I think the most creative minds right now, you know, clearly some of them are working on vaccines, and some of them are working on redefining what it means to, you know, create value or to work or even to exist as a society. So I think asking those questions loudly, I think, is the starting point.
I have a question for both of you. Are you optimists? And if so, why?
I believe it was Karl Popper who said that optimism is a duty. And it's a duty because, you know, the future is something for us to build. And so if it is for us to build, we can certainly make it better. So, I mean, that's one way to look at this. And so then, yes, you need to believe in a better world, because, you know, that world is in our hands.
Yeah, I think it'd be impossible to do this and not be. I think what happens with experience is it tempers that into a certain confrontation with the harsh realities of constraints and stuff. But I think what we do, you know, in these, you know, creative disciplines is we understand those constraints as sort of a place to push off from, the earth to push off from, to stand up. And I think it does take a sort of an optimistic spirit to define, you know, to place yourself into that landscape.
What is your favorite gadget, Carlo, right now?
Wow, I'm not sure. I'll tell you the first thing that comes to mind. Actually, there's a project we designed last year. It's called Scribit. Actually, last year was named by Time Magazine one of the best inventions of the year. Scribitel is the little robot that can write and erase on walls. So anyway, we started production last year, and now with the pandemic, it actually developed a whole series. The company, the spin-off that we did, develop a series of content that's really for when you're at home and how you can transform your walls into this ever-changing canvas, a place where you can actually do crosswords, a place where you can play Sudoku also with your friend, and many other things. So somehow, I've been playing with it recently as a way to think creatively about how to reconfigure the small space. By the way, I just moved back to Europe, so I made more comfortable here, but I spent all my quarantine, my lockdown in the United States. And so in a way to reconfigure the empty canvas inside our homes.
The empty canvas inside our heads. No, but
that probably requires another project. But yes, that is also possible.
I saw the script in a design magazine. I loved it very much. But both of you, I think we agree that we discuss it from a very elitist point. We are all three white people. I'm the eldest in the room. You're younger, and how do you see? How can we manage that the not so privileged people can engage in the future of humanity, the future of a better world? How are you engaged to give the not so privileged people around us a chance?
It was interesting that you bring that up. So I won't tell you about my corkscrew as my favorite gadget, because this is a pretty deep question. I would say that, I have engaged with some students recently. I'm not connected to the university. I'm on a board of a university institute, but engaging with some of these students in a way, I was impressed with the questions that they were asking and the roles that they feel that design should be playing with respect to designing, for equity or designing for a better society. And that is, I think, fundamentally the most vulnerable, humble questions that one asks as a designer generally aren't elitist. Unfortunately, I think design has gets an elitist reputation because of somehow how the media treats us or it and glorifies certain things with, I jokingly call it, the candlestick holder that gets on the cover of a magazine. I think that there's much more profound work that's happening that really, has the ability to ask questions about redesigning societies, redesigning communities, and the role that design has to play. And it is one of the reasons why, I came to Steelcase. I was going to stick around for 2 or 3 years, and it's been 20. One of the reasons is our engagement with the community and our understanding that we have a responsibility to play there, not just create profit, but to create, sort of an engagement with the community, and that isn't about people. So I think you use the platforms you have, right? You can be a single designer who has a big social media voice, or you can be somebody in a big corporation like myself leading a big team. And it's not just your everyday choices, but then you say, how do I align with something that shares our value? So I think, and then you just take a step day by day, with your North Star being the fact that we are trying to create good through the work and not just create more stuff.
Yeah. I would say 2 things which are related. The first one, yes, design can help us, can help a lot in achieving, in making sure that we act together and that we are more inclusive. I'll tell you just something. It's a research project we've been doing over the past year with KTH in the city of Stockholm, and there we're using basically a lot of data about how communities mix in the city in order to see the level of integration and segregation in the city, and how we can actually improve that integration, that inclusion. And so first thing, again, you look at data in order to see what is going on, which are the communities that are more introverted. We all know that in some cities you go something like what has happened in Brussels, where you got Molenbeek in big central part of the city that just started becoming a bit segregated from the rest, and that's something that the mayor was telling me, has anyway, over the past few years, I've created a lot of issues. So how can you measure that first, and then try to see how to intervene in the city? Clearly, again, public space is one of the best solutions we have. Public space, again, is the place where we need to confront everybody else in society. Is a space we share, and you know, it is a space that brings us together. It is a space of inclusion. So that's the first thing I want to mention. But clearly, if you look at this in a broader sense, especially in light of what's happening now in the United States, clearly the only way we can address that is more profound, is through education. And I think that's you know, certainly one of the reasons why I'm one of the things I'm doing is really working at the Higher Education Institute at MIT. I think, by the way, that universities today are a big dinosaurs. Universities are today still follow the model that was developed in Bologna in the year 1000, over 1,000 years ago, and you know, they haven't evolved much. So I think, you know, rethinking the university model, because traditionally university is the place, well, the schooling in general is the place where everybody comes together and where really we can give everybody the same opportunities. That's not what is happening today, also because of the cost of higher education and other levels of education, but that is certainly where we should start if you want to build a more just and equitable society.
I think this is a wonderful end of our session, because the future of education is at the end what brings us all together, what brings the next generation with the older together, and the future of universities as old dinosaurs has to be disrupted. And I wish I could be part of this disruption, because it's so needed and so necessary. This talk of the two of you young boys, was only the beginning, I think, of a more broader discussion. I wish myself that the two of you will meet very soon in a productive conversation and exchange, that we all will meet at DLD, wherever, in Singapore and Brussels and in Munich at the end, not virtual, but in reality. Thank you for your creativity, for your humane approach, for your openness. I'm proud of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Steffi. Thank you, everybody who connected today. See you soon.
Bye. Bye.